It has been a week since the New Year's Eve, and one day Andy received a call from his uncle who lives in Fairbanks, Alaska. He knew that his nephew was having a winter holiday from school, and he asked his nephew if he was interested to borrow his cabin in the wilderness of Alaska. And Andy actually had been to this cabin once before when he was younger. And he said, "Yeah, I would like to go there. It has been a while since I've been there," he said to his uncle. And his uncle said it was actually okay for him to invite a few friends with him to this cabin. And he actually thought of exactly who he'll invite: his best friend Noah and his girlfriend Daniella. And Daniela was actually very eager to. She has never even been there. She even saw this trip to be as like a small vacation trip. And even when Noah had asked Andy if it was okay for him to invite Olivia, his girlfriend, to this trip. And Andy said yes, it is actually okay. And they actually were really happy about it. But then Andy thought about why not invite at least a few more. So he thought about his friends Tony and Kelly, who was really close friends of his. And both were actually very excited. But they had to have the parents' permission first of all. But they all knew that Andy was a very good person, and they all gave permission to go. Since they didn't know exactly how far the trip was gonna be. So they just then Noah had asked him when they were going, and he said, "We're leaving on Friday." Okay, we'll meet by the bus station then. At the bus station. Sure, we do that. Since the trip from between Oregon State to Washington State would take it would take about 6 hours to travel. Originally, they had thought about plane, but unfortunately, they didn't had afford enough for all of them together to be in a plane, so they decided to take a bus. Luckily, though, for Andy's dad, who helped them to figure out exactly which they were actually a one bus line went from their hometown in Oregon all the way to Seattle, and from there, they're going to travel from Seattle to Fairbanks. On Friday, they all waited outside the bus station with their parents and said goodbye. They promised to keep informed their parents on the trip on the bus to Seattle, just to make sure that they are doing okay. They arrived from their hometown to Seattle to about 6 hours. And during the time, Olivia, Kelly, and Tony had asked Andy about this cabin, what it's like, if there's how far it's from out from Fairbanks, and how far it's from uh, any settlements around it, how it's located. And Andy said this cabin was actually located about at least 2 miles outside of Fairbanks in a part of the wilderness. And they had even asked if there were any other cabins around in the area. As far as that Andy remembered from his childhood, there was at least one a cabin to the west of his uncle's, but that was only used mostly during the summer times, so there were no other people around the area. And they even asked if there was any electricity in this cabin, and Andy said yes, it is, since his uncle used that cabin sometimes as like a refuge place when he goes to get away from the modern society from time to time during the summer or the winter, just to relax. So he said that they would also solar panels just in case for any extra power, and even a gasoline generator, and also wood stove for if there was something would happen. And he even smiled and said to them, his friends, that he had asked his uncle to put some supplies in that cab for them, like how to make s'mores and other good stuff, and maybe some drinks. And they were just ecstatic. Both excited for since Olivia, Kelly, and Tony has never been outside of this particular has never been outside of their home state before. Only Noah had once been with and his family to his cabin when they were younger, and he actually liked the place. And he even informed what he remembered from the place as a very good place. But he did mention this: there is a lot of bears, wolves, even bobcats in the area, but there was nothing to worry about. And Andy agreed on that because the bears at the time was mostly in hibernation. But if there were any bears, they were probably scared of them. And on the ride, they had kept informed their parents on how the trip went. They were doing well and they were mostly sleeping. But after 6 hours, they arrived finally to Seattle. They were excited to be in this new whole state and also big city. But they even asked a bus driver if he knew where to find this airfield that he was being informed by his dad, since they didn't have afford the plane ticket from their hometown to Seattle. They still would even been afford enough to even buy a plane ticket from Seattle to Fairbanks. So, but his dad had managed to figure out there were a smaller airfield that rented out smaller planes that would be enough for them to take them all the way to Fairbanks. The driver told them where to find this place, and they managed to find a small cab in here outside this bus station and took them there. They booked this smaller plane, and the pilot told them that it would take them at least a few hours of being going there. And they asked how much. The pilot said about 39 hours. Both Olivia, Kelly, and Tony and Noah. They was like, 39 hours? Are this crazy? That's crazy. But, well, we had to take it, said Tony, well, Andy with a smile, since we don't have another planes to go there. Yeah, they're right, said Noah back. After he was getting ready for the pilot to make sure that everything was loaded and all that stuff. But, unfortunately, what they didn't know was going to happen after that. The weather was a bit cloudy, a little bit of slight wind, but nothing too serious. The plane took off. There was this smaller model, and during the flight, almost halfway through, they were nearly in the Alaska state. They were only a few miles outside of. They were only a few miles away from Fairbanks. But as they're trying though, on the flying there, the right of the weather has condition has started to get a little bit from decent to worse. During the flight, the wind has started picking up speed, and the pilot had been informed by the weather broadcast it was going to be a bad storm in the area, but he had hoped to be able to find some place to land, or maybe the storm would pass by the area so they wouldn't have to land. So, but the pilot always kept an eye on this forecast and even informed the passengers. Most of the girls and Tony were asleep. There were only Andy and Noah that were still awake. They were just small talking a little quietly, or they just looked out the window. But as they was riding the plane out, the weather was getting even more and more worse. It was getting a lot more worse, and the planes are shaking up a little more at the wind, which makes everyone on board awake. Even though Daniela insured Noah and the others says just probably is a bit turbulence. Yeah, that's probably right, said Noah. But I'm scared, said Kelly. Nothing not to be afraid of, said Andy. It happens. You know, when we enter a bad storm, a bad winter, a bad wind, it can happen. Even the pilot tried to ensure the others that this is just normal. But then suddenly, after it was nearly like 4 to 5 miles outside of Fairbanks, the weather outside had been such rough. The wind has picked up speed, and they were suddenly in the middle of this snowstorm. It was a middle snowstorm, and the pilot tried as hard as he could to pilot this from the storm, but it was just too dangerous. and he was informing the others that he was being forced to find a place to land, even if this had to wait out the storm, because it's getting too worse. So, he was trying to figure out a place to stop to land, but then suddenly, boom! One of those. They all looked out. One of the engines had stopped working. It stopped, like there was like a boom, and it stopped spinning. And the pilot, he was trying to ensure the others that he can make this start working again, but he never did, because at the same moment, a second boom happened, and the second engine, the engines on the other side, stopped. Now, the plane was just hanging in the air just only for a few moments before it slowly start diving down from the air. Now the girls and Tony, and including Noah, was terrified. They all screamed, "We're gonna die! We're not gonna die!" "No, we're not," said and Andy back to him. "The pilot knows exactly what he does." And the pilot, though, even he didn't respond to that. But he tried to keep them up from this, find a place to stop, or at least crash land if needed. But the last thing that they all saw was that the ground was getting closer, and bam, nothing else. Almost an hour later, Andy woke up in a daze and feeling hurt. His head was like bleeding or something. And he didn't even remember was he was not sure what he wasn't really sure what he where he were at the time. But after thinking and coming to clearance, he remembers he was on the plane and they were crashing fall down from the sky, and he immediately looked around to his friends. They were all out unconscious, but he managed to at least wake up Noah and Daniella. And as soon, after only another few minutes, the others was also awake. They make sure there weren't no any injuries. They all ask, "What happened? Where are we?" But Andy said he wasn't sure exactly where they were, but he said at least on the ground alive, and they have well the pilot was forced to land on the ground since the boat engines had stopped working. "The pilot," said Andy. And he got up, even though he felt a bit dazed, but he managed to walk up to the cockpit. They found that the pilot bunched over on the steering wheel. It looks like he was unconscious. But as he was looking, and he felt the pulse, but no pulse at all. The pilot was dead. Turns out the pilot died in the impact, so he didn't suffer from any pain at all. But as then he went back to the others and they asked, "How's the pilot?" But Andy stood there silently, and they all realized the pilot was dead. "We're gonna die out there." "No, we're not. Listen." "But where are we?" "Wait, can't we use the radio to contact for help?" asked Tony for more reason. "Yeah, we can do that," said Noah, more loudly. And they went back, but unfortunately, during the impact, the radio was damaged beyond repair. And when Andy informed this to his friends, the girls went silently and sat down crying. Now they said like some like, "We're done for. We will never be found. We have no idea where we are, and we're in the middle of a snowstorm, and we have no idea what we're going to do. The pilot is dead, and we cannot even contact anyone for help. We can be in the middle of nowhere. We can be like miles away from Fairbanks or any other bigger part of settlements." That was actually Olivia saying about crying. But she had a point. They had no idea where exactly the location are. Without the pilot's help and what did this radio damaged, there was nothing else they could do. What should we do? said Tony but scaredly. Andy was the one who tried to act more confident and more trying to act calm. Okay, this is all we will do. We stay here. What? The whole time? Said everyone. No, we stay here for the night. It is too dangerous to go out outside in the middle of the storm. At least we have some shelter for the night. But what should we do for eat? That I can help with, said Andy. And he managed to wink backwards on the back of the plane and grabbed out something on his backpack and was actually some sandwiches. You pack sandwiches? Um, yeah, it's if we were to get hungry on the way. Oh, well, at least we have something to eat now, said Tony a bit calmly. What will you be doing next, though? Well, we stay here, try to get some sleep, and hopefully by tomorrow the storm has passed. And then we can try to figure out what to do next. And but would that what would that be? Said Olivia stuttered. Yeah, what would that be? Said Kelly. Daniela looked at her friends and said, the next step is to try to figure out where to go. We can't stay here for all long. And we don't even know if this. Yeah, but what if they're trying to find us? And they manage to find the plane and we're not even here. And we have walked away. I mean, it's better to find help than rather stay here, isn't it? Said, said Noel a bit more calmly this time. Yeah, but we can't just stay, just leave. I mean, what if we walk further away from Fairbanks? Or even, what if we end up in the middle of nowhere? I mean, I heard that Alaska is thousands of miles of wilderness. There's miles of wilderness, said Tony a little bit angrily. But Andy just said to Tony calmly, Tony, I know you're scared, we all are, but we had to do something. And I only had this sandwich for only for next tonight. And there is nothing else we can do. And even if we don't have it to find a way to get out of here, we only will eventually starve or worse, freeze to death. We had to do something. Yeah, but what? I don't know. But we had to do something. At least here, have something to eat, and we will get some sleep and figure out it tomorrow. But the next day, the storm had actually passed, and they were figured for thinking and talking what to do next. They first did want to stay behind in the plane, but as Tony and the others said, maybe this is the best place to stay though. I mean, we have these shelters and, but yes, that's probably a good thing, but we don't even know how far we are from the middle civilization. And even if they are looking for us, it can take days or maybe weeks. But then Andy said, you know, even if they are looking, they have no idea in which direction the plane even took. They can spend months for looking for us. And if I'm guessing right, after nearly maybe after like 2 to 3 weeks, they will even call off the search and we will be declared dead, missing. That was something the rest of the others hadn't even thought of. So Tony had a point that they could stay there, but meaning the risk that never been found by the rescue. But Andy said if we visit we still have a chance to stay here, yes. But we also have an opportunity, or at least a chance to just leave here and go somewhere else. Yeah, but where? There's nothing else we can do. Listen, I know this is something we don't want to do, okay? But we had to do something. I understand that, Tony, but we had to do something else too. Okay, how about this? How about we make a vote? We vote for at least what we do next, okay? Since the five of us here, even though there won't be equal voting, but then they all decide who want to stay and who want to go. And turns out, majority wanted to go. Only Tony wanted to stay. But even of that, he was the only one who wanted to stay behind, but he chose to go with the others. They only packed a light things with them. But before they left, Andy walked up to the pilot to look through his pocket to see if this had anything that he can use, like a, maybe a lighter or something. And lucky enough, the pilot actually had a lighter on him. And he said, "I'm sorry." But he took the lighter because who knew if this one could be eventually come to use, eventually at some point later on. So they all only grabbed the light packing, like only what they had with them. Some spare clothes and some other, and of course some leftover food they had. But they didn't exactly choose from what direction to go, so they just picked one and kept walking and walking and walking. At least it was not the middle of the day, and it was only a light breeze. But it was a very difficulty to walking because they were walking from deep snow. And after a while, they were all getting tired of walking from the dense woods and this deep snow. And as Andy looked at his watch, they had only walked through less. They left the plane around 10 in the morning. And they had been walking for at least a few hours, and it's already 1 p.m. And he knew, and eventually in a few hours it will be dark. And they had to find a shelter somewhere fast, or maybe to risk of doing something. And he told his friends all about this, but there was nothing else they could do. But eventually, in the while they're walking, Noah saw something in the distance. Hey, is that a house? A house middle of nowhere? Said Tony. I don't think that just any house, said Andy. What do you mean? Well, I think that might be a hunting cabin. A hunting cabin? Yeah, hunters use cabins in the middle of the hunting season. They can stay there. I mean, this is there's no hunting season now, but we might can use that for shelter. At least we have some roof overhead. So they walked over there to that small cabin, and sure enough, it was a small hunting cabin. The door wasn't even locked, luckily, so they were managed at least easily to get in. And inside was just this old iron wooden stove, and looks like to be a bed and like a small kitchen or something like that, cabins, stuff like that. And of course, as there was no food left there since the hunting season was over for the past few months. But they found at least some firewood and some papers. But then they realized they couldn't find any matches or anything to light. So you can't make a fire without a lighter or something. You mean like this? Where did you get that from? From the pilot. You took it? I mean, think about it. The pilot was dead, and I thought maybe this could maybe come in handy at some point. Yeah, you've been right. So they made a light, a small fire, but as the rest of the day went on, they heard suddenly the wind pick up again. Another storm? Asked Kelly. Yeah, it happens that this particular state can actually have a few snowstorms middle of the night. It happens, but don't worry. Do you think they can last for just overnight? Hard to say. They can last for a few hours, maybe a day. Hard to say for certain. I mean, I haven't been in Alaska for several years now, said Andy. But let's try to get some sleep. But as they went on, that night, Andy realized the storm wasn't passing. And by the next day, the storm has still haven't get up yet, hasn't faded. And they couldn't just go outside. And they also realized they were only getting low on firewood. But luckily though, Andy found this small kind of small building outside where he managed to find at least a few more firewood just in case if something would happen. But even when he realized that would not be enough for a long time, and as that day went on, they were all hungry. They hadn't even had anything else to eat. And the only thing that they could do was just sit there, hear their stomach growling of hunger, feeling tired. But as the day on, as the day came and went, it was still a snowstorm. But on the next day after that, like the second day in this small hunting cabin, the snowstorm still hasn't faded and remains strong as was before. And the others was getting desperate. They didn't know what to do. They still have only a few wood fireplaces that can be used. Maybe the bricks on the furniture to use as firewood, but that was pretty much it. And no food to speak of. They had no other option what to do. But Andy only had one option to say. They should have to, at least one of them has to go to get help. But the others warned that would be too dangerous, especially walking through a snowstorm, middle of the night or middle of the day. It would be too dangerous. It would be a suicidal mission. But Andy couldn't stand there, see his girlfriend so hungry, and so tired. She just felt so weak. She barely get out of that small bed that she had made. The others were the same thing. So after that middle of the night, Andy left the lighter and he left the cabin, full dressed, middle of the night. The others didn't wake from that because they were so tired, they were so hungry, they were weak, and didn't felt they could even just look up. So Andy left the cabin middle of the snowstorm. Even he knew this would be too dangerous. But he knew it was nothing else that they could do. He could just sit there to see his friends and his girlfriend and his best friend starving to death without doing anything. So he left middle of the night, even though it was made very difficult for him to walk through the snow, a deep snow, but as powerful strong winds are blowing against his face. He had to struggle. And another thing, he had even no idea where he was going, since they were middle of nowhere. But he decided to walk. But at the same time as he was walking, he was thinking about his parents, if he would ever see them. And he wonders what they were doing now, because his uncle would have been expecting his nephew within the next 2 days ago, because he was supposed to meet them at the airport and take them to this cabin. But when that didn't happen, because while he was walking, for the past 2 days, after his uncle hadn't saw him at the airport, or at least the airfield that they were supposed to be at, he contacted his parents, his brother, and his dad to see if they actually had even left. Because he was a little bit worried that they hadn't even arrived yet. But his parents explained that they did leave according to plan. But his uncle said that he hasn't even arrived. And so Andy's uncle went to the small airport to see at the Fairbanks and asked for any directions of the plane has even arrived yet, since it has been 2 days. But the airport controllers have no idea, because they tried to reach out to the plane but no response, and they had even tried to figure out exactly which direction or destination this path this plane was supposed to be taken. But as there was a snowstorm in the area, they probably had landed for the night. But then, since the storm passed, they should have been arrived with them. But they haven't. So the pilot probably had landed somewhere middle of nowhere, or the worst case that they had crashed. That was one thing that Andy's uncle was afraid of what could happen. So luckily though, with the pilot, with the airport's personnel had started being rescued, they started looking around. And even though Andy's parents and the others' parents they want to go to Fairbanks, But Andy's uncle told them the best way to stay there and that he will keep them updated for any information that's come through. But 2 days, nothing. On the third day, nothing. And even their parents had started wondering if something would have happened. But around the same time, middle of the night, Andy was still walking through the dense forest in the deep snow. It happened he fell to the ground several times, almost struggling from this deep snow, this powerful howling wind. But he always get up because even he was equally hungry and as weak as his friends were. But he didn't get up. He didn't want to give up because he didn't want to let down his girlfriend to die because of him. So as he struggles through the snow, and eventually, as he was laying and almost fell to the ground, passing out, but then he smelled something. Fire, or at least smoke. As he looked up, in the distance, he saw this bigger cabin, and he realized he was thinking, was he actually hallucinating of this smell of fire of based on this due to his weak and hunger? But as he looking, it looked real. But he had only thinking just keep walking in the one direction away from this supposed hallucination. But when he realized this was something that he could risk, he decided to keep walking towards this, even if it was a hallucination. But as he was getting closer and closer, he realized this wasn't a dream. It was an actual cabin. So realized that he somehow gets some more strength. So he pushed to his limit through the snow, and as he was by the door, he was still weak and he managed to bang on the door so hard enough. But as the door opened, he just fell to the floor inside the cabin, passed out. But it didn't take long for him to wake up. Maybe 10 minutes later, he noticed this older man, probably in his mid 30s, sitting by his side in his bed, keeping wondering what he's been doing, where he's come from, and who is he. He only asked him if he was okay, and even though he was tired, but he said that he wasn't doing well. He was tired, weak, hungry, exhausted. The man asked him where he has been coming from, and why would he walk through this snowstorm better to stay indoors? Even though Andy was tired, but he tried to explain as best as he could about the plane crash, that he was with his friends, and they had to walk through the snow. They found this old hunting cabin, and they were all there. They had been there during the snowstorm for the past 2 days, and they didn't had any food or anything else. The man then stood, looked at Andy surprised because he heard about this plane crash search on the radio, and from and then Andy asked how far they were from Fairbanks, and the man said they were only like 10 miles northwest from the northeast from Fairbanks. 10 miles, so they were close, but so far it's still feeling distant. But as suddenly another person came down from the upstairs, but it was apparently the man's young wife. She had also been informed what happened. She was worried about this young man who just suddenly barged in, but her husband informed her what was happening, and she was surprised. She promised him to look after him, and then the man walked away and went to a radio and said something to someone that he had found one of the survivors from this recent plane crash who had literally walked into his cabin, fell on on the floor, and the others are still alive, but the pilot was dead. And shortly, maybe a few hours later, at least a group of people arrived. There were at least there were park rangers and a few volunteers, about maybe as 5 people. And they asked now Andy, who is a little bit more awake and has been giving some food to eat, asking him exactly where this direction to find. Well, he wasn't really sure because he had no idea, but he said it has to be in this direction. But he pointed out from the window. I think it was most from that direction. By now, the footprints have probably been covered by now, he said. But I think from that direction, it is an old hunting cabin. But the man of the house of this cabin realized exactly which one he means. And he said, I can take you there. And so the man thanked Dan Andy for his help and for his partially the directions, and they went there. And at the time, his friends were still tired. They had realized that Andy had left. And there's like, Tony said, he abandoned us here. But Daniela, who was still tired and hungry, said, no, I'm sure he went to find help. As if he left us here to die alone. No, said Noah. But then they heard sounds outside. Did you hear that? Maybe a bear to finally came to end us. Don't talk like that, said Kelly with anger to Tony. But then suddenly the door opened, and they all saw a group of people. First they believed maybe it was hallucinations, maybe it was angels that finally came to take them to heaven. But as they saw it was actual people, a park ranger and other few people. And they asked if they were friends to Andy. Daniela said, yes. Is he? He's fine. He's at my cabin, said the man, and pointed himself. We're here to take you back there. So, after about maybe a half an hour, they all had been taken to this man's cabin, and they were rested there overnight, since it was still a bit risky to take all of them to hospital in Fairbanks. By the early morning, since the storm passed, they were all taken into hospital for any further examination just to make sure they were in perfect condition. By the time Andy's uncle had been informed by they had found his nephew and his friends and which hospital they were at, his uncle was beyond happy, crying that this to seeing his nephew well okay. Andy has never seen his uncle like this before. Crying is like it was beyond his character. But that same afternoon, Andy and his friends were allowed to leave the cabin in the hospital and went to his uncle's place. There, they had this FaceTime with Andy's dad and his mom and the rest of the parents, who was equally happy to see that they were okay. But Andy and the others had told them that they are not coming home. They were like surprised. Why? Well, we plan to stay here for this weekend, or this week in this cabin, and we still having our still gonna stay here for a week. Okay, but make sure you don't leave the cabin like that again. And this time, just be safe. And they promised. So the rest of that week, everyone actually did went to Andy's uncle's cabin in the forest. This time, he had actually put a lot more supplies for them, more s'mores, and even hot chocolate, of all kind of things that were required. And they actually had a great time. Even at the time when they came there, Tony actually apologized to Andy. Andy was clueless what he was apologizing for. Because, but then Kelly said, he thought you abandoned us at this cabin so you can go just abandon us. What? Tony, you know I would never abandon none of you, my friends. And do you think I would even abandon Daniela like that? No, I'm It, don't worry, Tony. You don't have to be saying sorry. I understand what you mean. Don't worry about it. The rest of that week, it went just perfectly well. They had a great time watching the snow together when it was snowing, and even exploring the wilderness, and even went into Fairbanks to just explore town. But this time, they went for a bigger plane to back home because this time, Andy's parents, the other parents, along with his uncle, have managed to raise enough money for them to bid to pay plane tickets from from Fairbanks to Seattle, and from Seattle they would take the bus ride home. But before they went, they asked his uncle if it was possible to reach out to this man who actually saved his friends and himself. And he did. His uncle promised that he will do that. And after they had to ride home, almost like a week later, and sure enough, the parents were so happy to see that their children was home again, alive. But they promised next time they will try to arrange to use a bigger airplane than a smaller one. But they also ride back to this airport when the smaller plane that they rented to ask them to send a message to the pilot's family for any thanks because even though he died in impact, but his sacrifice made that they survived. And if the one wasn't for him, none of them would even been happy, would have been around. So they told the pilot's family they were equally happy and sorry about their loss, and they will never forget the brave man who saved their lives in the crash. And the pilot's family was really appreciated their thoughts about it. And the lighter that Andy had, he actually managed to grab it with him. Oh, actually, Daniella took it with them when they left and gave it to Andy. And he was one about to send it back to this pilot's family, but he told them to keep it as a memory, and he did. And the man is and his wife, who found well that Andy found in the cabin, have been informed, and they said they were always welcome back to the cabin if something would happen again. But perhaps next time, come there, buy own car or anything, but not being like in that circumstances again, which made Andy and his friends laugh and they promised not to do that again. And rest of the school year about this in spring, everyone had been informed what happened for them, but they were just surprised that they managed to survive, and then were just like, "You are really lucky. Not many would survive like that," and they agreed. Not many people do survive anything like that in a wilderness in the winter, especially during a snowstorm. And a few years after they finished high school and college, Andy and Daniela they actually got married. And they actually sometimes went back to Alaska to Andy's uncle's cabin. When his uncle passed away only a few years after he finished college, he had left in his will that the cabin would go to Andy, and he was allowed to vote if he wanted to keep it or sell it for someone else. But he decided to keep it in his family. After all, it was actually his uncle's and his dad's grandfather who built this cabin. So he wanted to keep it in his family for at least another few his future generations. And when Andy and Daniela had children of their own one day, they told them about their adventure the first time they went to Alaska. And they happened that they went to Alaska with their children during the summer or in winter to spend holiday. And they often went to see the wilderness. But both Andy and Daniela, along their friends, are just happy they did manage to survive. And if it was for Andy's quick questions or the quick actions, and his willingness to sacrifice his own life or even jeopardize it, managed to save them all. If he had even left, they would not have been found at all. And that is something they all agreed But his quick thinking and his willingness to stand up for himself, to just risk his life just to find help, was the best thing they had ever done. If it wasn't even done that, things could have gone way differently. Their parents could have found their bodies in the wind, in the summer or anything, and that it was something that they didn't. There is something that they don't want to think about. But Andy was just happy to have managed to save not only his, but Diana's life and his friends. Because if they hadn't even found it, he would have missed out this amazing life to one day get married with his girlfriend and having two daughters and one son with her. It would have been a life that he would have missed. And for that, he feels very grateful for his quick thinkings and actions all those years back. And he told Daniela, even though this was something he probably would do again, but he told her he would do it again and again. Just not only to save her, but his children's life, if something would happen. And this is how Daniela and Andy found a true love, got a big family together. The end.